OMG Teach Me friends. Here we are again, and this is going to be kind of a cool discussion. You probably, if you're on social media at all, have heard of people taking a cold plunge or cold water swimming or the polar plunge. It's becoming more and more popular, and I don't know about you, but I have been quite curious about maybe why people subject themselves to this and also what are the benefits, because there must be a reason, right? So, my guest today, Corina Goetz, is a CEO who has lived in London for over 20 years. She's married, she has a son, and she's originally from East Germany. So, she has vivid memories of the Berlin Wall falling when she was 12 years old, and you can just imagine all that goes along with that. She also has had a long fascination with the Middle East. And so in her career, she created a business, StarCat, to break stereotypes, educate clients, help them succeed with business in the Middle East. And that is amazing. You may have heard me talk about how much I liked traveling to the UAE this past year. And today, we're going to talk about something else that Corina does, and that is cold water swimming. She finds it a great way to relax and work on her mindset. And so we're really going to dive into that one. So, Corina, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
I'm looking forward to this chat for sure. Okay, so our stories are always powerful. It's always interesting to see how we get to where we end up. So tell us a little bit of your story about getting interested in and starting to get involved in cold water swimming.
Well, this is a really interesting story because I kind of started out a little bit, probably like a lot of people during COVID, like a challenge. And I love swimming, I love water. And firstly, there's not really a lot of places that you can go and swim in London, which is quite unusual because in Germany you have sort of these pools and lakes everywhere. But in London, this is not really common. However, there are some places, and one of the places that I go and swim in London is actually called a pond. And to those of you who don't know, it's a bit like a lake. There's like trees surrounding it. You swim with the ducks. It's really like in nature. And it's a really beautiful place. And there's actually three ponds that are not far from each other. One is women only, one is men only, and then one is mixed. And I normally end up going to the women's one because it's quite nice. It's very different. I have to say, I'm quite excited to go. Every once in a while, they let us go to the man's pond because it's a very different one and it's very open and it's much bigger. So it's kind of exciting as well. And they're very close to each other, but it's only to very pre-selected times. So yes, so going back, so during 2020, obviously, there wasn't during COVID, you couldn't really go on a lot of holidays and swim. So I started swimming in the summer in the pond. And then I started realizing, oh, there's a lot more people that swim throughout the year because the pond is open all year round and there's lifeguards there. So obviously there's a lot of security measures in place. So it's quite easy, even if you're like new to it. And initially I just thought, I wonder how I wonder how long I can keep going with like what will the temperature be? Will I be able to do this in the winter? Maybe I should just try. So I did. And then I became hooked on the whole thing.
Well, that's perfect. Yes. So, when did it really get cold? What point of the year were you really thinking, wow, I don't know?
Well, I mean, I think I also have to preface that in 2020, there were obviously a couple of different lockdowns through autumn as well. And then in during some of them, they had to close the pond for 3 or 4 weeks. And especially, I think there was a period, I think they closed it in November. And I think when I went in October, I think it was about 12 to 13 degrees. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's not very warm, let's just say. And and then when they reopened it after 3 or 4 weeks in November, it had dropped to about 6, which was about half. And I thought, I don't know. Should I try? And then I used to look at these people that went to the pond and they had like these gloves and socks, and I'm thinking, why do these people have these gloves and socks? This looks ridiculous. And then somebody said to me, no, because your hands and your feet, they are normally get cold the fastest and you can feel that the most. So that's why we wear gloves and socks, these neoprene gloves and socks. You should try it. And oh my God, it really changed. So now for me, the point where I changed to glove and socks is about 7 degrees because I tested it below and I'm like, oh my God, I can't do it without it. But above it, I'm fine. And so it's really interesting. And then it just worked. And obviously, because you had the lifeguards there, they are very good in coaching new people, and they're like, make sure you just, first of all, you have to come regularly. If you've never done this before, make sure you do take cold showers every day. And I
Mm.
used to do that in the run up to this. During the lockdown, I thought, okay, at least I'll try the cold showers for, half a minute or a minute. So at least I have some form of cold water. And then they really coach you. And they say basically, when you go into the water and you start feeling, when you think, oh, I'm actually okay, I can do this, this is the point where you need to come out, because
Mm.
otherwise you can very easily overdo it. And a lot of people underestimate that. So, yeah. So, and then I kind of just started, going like very regularly. And because everything else kind of then, was very minimum. You couldn't really travel. You couldn't really do a lot. This kind of almost became a little bit of a highlight of the day. So I used to go
Yeah.
pretty much every day. And then, of course, my body became very quickly accustomed to it. And one of the other side effects that it's actually, I think the best way to describe it is you go and you feel really happy. It's like as if somebody has given you some kind of happy hormones. You feel really happy afterwards. And it's a really strange effect that I can't explain.
Wow.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit to it. If you have pain, like, I don't know, some people, have period pain, or you had a headache, like the minute you would go into cold water, that would kind of go away. And it's the same
Wow.
when you feel, I mean, I think very much that I'm in sort of perimenopause, because this perimenopause, they say, is sort of 10 years prior to menopause. And you have these sort of mood swings where you think, oh, I'm not feeling it today. Every single time when I went to go and swim, I felt so much better afterwards. And I think maybe that's a reason why I just became hooked. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good.
Yeah, I this is fascinating. And for my listeners who don't know Celsius, if I use my little conversion that I do in my head, 12 to 13 degrees Celsius is in the 50s in Fahrenheit, and 6 is in the 40s. So we are talking about cold water. I just want to make that clear. That could be dangerous. And so I appreciate that you're saying there are lifeguards, they were training people, because listeners, we don't want you to go out and do this by yourself with no training and no oversight and no partner or whatever it is. So let me just make sure I say that before we go any further. So I really do want to dive into some of these benefits. So you mentioned mood. And so definitely let's talk about that. And then also you mentioned pain. So tell us a little bit more about what has happened for you with any sort of physical pain type of benefits.
I mean, I had a couple of really interesting experiences when, for example, I had a bit of like period pain, and I would feel a bit like, ugh, like I'm not. I feel, I have to say though that I think I have a very high pain threshold, but every once in a while, like you're not feeling it. And every single time when I thought, oh, I really don't want to go, that was the best time when I went, because I came back and I felt, oh my God, I feel like a new person. And it's really interesting because maybe some of your listeners may have heard there is a guy that has been talking about the benefits of cold water for quite some time, called Wim Hof. It's a Dutch guy, and basically what he says is, and this is also going back to mood, and if you have sort of issues, or you have, I mean, issues in terms of like problems, or I think sometimes as women we also like spiral and we think, we overthink a lot of things. He says if you go into cold water, that will go away, because essentially all you can think is, oh my god, it's so cold. And it's so true, because you go in and you think, oh my god, it's so cold, and everything else is kind of gone, because you can only like think about the cold. And it's just very, very refreshing, and it's almost like, I think you're coming back in tune with your body. And then I had another experience. I went to Italy last year to one of these health places, and I had a very few busy weeks leading up to it, and when I got there I had a headache, and I was like, oh, this is the last thing that I need. But they had a spa, and in the spa they had a cold plunge. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just dip my head into the cold plunge. And I did. And the headache went without anything. And I'm like, wow, this is good. So this is what I need to keep doing. So it's really, I think it's really interesting. And then coming back to like the mood, I think, we as women, not every day is the same. Sometimes we feel a bit like, oh, I can't really,
Yes.
I don't know, like hormonal, or you feel a bit, I don't even want to say depressed, but like your mood is really low
Hmm.
and you can't explain why. And I think a lot of it has to do with hormones and perimenopause and maybe menopause and these kind of mood swings. And I used to think, initially, when this happened to me, I'm like, this is not me. I'm not like that. Why am I feeling this way? And when I used to go into these sort of like cold water swims, I used to feel so much better afterwards. And I have to say, this is mainly when the water is really cold. Like in the summer, it doesn't necessarily have the same effect, even though the water, if you're not used to it, is probably still cold, but it's not the same as if you go in the winter, because in the winter it's like literally the shock effect of your
I'm
body.
sure.
And then another benefit that I can attest to, which is interesting, I have, and I'm sure lots of people have heard about this, I have an autoimmune condition called psoriasis, which is, almost like you get like flaky skin, and nobody can really explain or cure it. I think the only way normally to have it under control is like steroids. And one of the things that I've seen that works really well for me is normally sunshine, but not sunshine in the UK. Like it has to be almost like Spain or something, like proper sunshine. And that is something that helps me sort of level this. But an interesting one is when I started cold water swimming, it had the same effect on my skin. And
Ah.
I was like, okay, this is another benefit. So it's obviously really good for your immune system. But not only that, I've since read up and it says basically your inflammation, if you have any kind of inflammation in your body, it brings it right down, because it almost like shuts the whole system and it has to just focus on the cold.
It's just so interesting. And listeners, of course, please note we're not giving medical advice here, but I will say I've battled eczema for ages and ages because my skin is super sensitive. And those two things are somewhat a little bit related.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm even more intrigued to see if something like this will help. Now, you told me, I think, that the Dutch, you mentioned Wim Hof, who's Dutch, who's
Yes.
done a lot of work on cold water swimming. And he did an experiment, didn't he, to see if people wouldn't get sick if they were doing this regularly.
Yes, I think it was a combination. It wasn't just cold water. I think he does a combination of breathing and cold water. So I think if people look him up, there's tons of YouTube videos about him. But basically, he did an experiment where, and I forget exactly what it was, but they injected him with some kind of bacteria where normally people would get really ill. And and it was all supervised and medically supervised. So he was very safe. But basically, through his breathing and I guess the cold water and everything, he managed to not have any effect. So then, of course, people could say, yeah, okay, fine, he's very fit and whatever. But he actually taught that same method 11 other people, and they repeated that experiment, and none of them got sick. Like you can, like your listeners can look this up on YouTube. And it's unbelievable. I mean, he does. I'm not that extreme, but he does these sort of camps where I think they go to like a place in Poland, and he trains people that by the end of, I think it's about a week or maybe 10 days, they climb or they walk up a mountain in bathing shorts in snow and cold. Like it's wild. I think they did, I think on Netflix, there was an episode on Goop, the one that Gwyneth Paltrow did. I think she did an episode on him because it was really, really astonishing how these results came up with things that everybody could technically do. I mean, he's a bit of a crazy one, you know. I think he climbed Kilimanjaro, I think, in his bathing shorts. Okay, I wouldn't recommend that. But but he is a big advocate of cold water, of breathing. And I think it started when his wife actually committed suicide. And that's kind of how he got into the whole thing, and to try and teach people that there are other ways and there are things that you can actually do. So it's really fascinating, I think.
It really is. And listeners, I'll see what I can put in the show notes to link you to have a look at that because it really is fascinating. So, Corina, when we talked prior to this, you also mentioned something to me that was very intriguing, and that was that you did some work training your brain to kind of be ready to take this on and keep going with it. And so tell me a little bit more about that.
I think, well, it's quite interesting because it started out as a challenge, and I was like, I really want to see um, if I can do this. And it was really interesting because it kind of coincided with a very interesting time in my business where things were obviously, you know, with COVID not going as well, and people weren't traveling, and that had a massive impact on what I was doing. And I guess it was kind of like, can I get to that next level? And interestingly, I'm normally one of these people who goes into the sea like, oh, you know, like I need a little minute and stuff. And my husband and my son, they tease me. They're like, aren't you the cold water swimmer? Like you should just go in. I'm like, yeah, this is different. So, but when I go for the cold water swim, first of all, there's like a ladder that you climb down, and normally there's always one or two people behind me. And it's literally, I've literally trained myself that when I get there, I go into the ladder and I go in. There's none of this, oh, you know, I need a minute. Um, but it's really interesting because I thought, this is also something that I can use for my business. You know, it's almost like you overcome these little challenges that you think you can't do, and then you do, and you think, oh my God, what else is possible? And I
Mm-hmm.
can totally overcome this. And for me, I think that cold water swimming was just one of these challenges that I felt I could overcome, because then afterwards my business completely like changed and transformed, and I took some decisions that probably I would have never taken if I hadn't pushed myself like this.
So, what do you think you were telling yourself that was different when you made these different decisions? What did that look like?
I think it was like, you just got to try. And I think subconscious, I trained my subconscious saying, look, you just try it with this cold water swimming. And it turned out okay. And actually, it turned out more than okay because it was very beneficial for you. So who knows what else you can do that's very beneficial for you. So, and I think it's really this. I mean, I've since listened to like a lot more experts talk about this, and they say, you know, these little milestones, they really move you forward, and they
Yes.
really make you feel you can make bigger decisions that probably before felt impossible.
Yes, yes, yes. And when I talk with my coaching clients, this comes up a lot. And basically, I would say, in a simple way, our brains are always looking for evidence that whatever we're trying to do is going to work or going to be safe or going to be okay. And so, yes, the more evidence you can feed your brain that, yes, I can do a challenging thing and I'm going to be okay, the better. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think sometimes you just have to think about it like that. Because I have another example of this. This just came to my mind. Because so when I go out of the pond, they have two ladders. One is a little bit sort of like not completely straight. So it's a bit easier to climb out. And then one is really straight, and that one's really hard to climb out. So what I now do, I alternate because I just think I can climb out the harder ladder. It's gonna be fine, so I can do harder things. So it's almost like I just want to prove to myself over and over and over again that this is I can do hard things. Some days I can do, things will flow if it's easier, but I can do both. And I think that's a very powerful way to try and motivate you to overcome other things, because again, going back to what you said, it's all evidence, isn't it?
Yes, and goodness, I love that because it's popular. I see it on social media that we say, I can do hard things. And that's kind of a mantra. I can do hard things. But I love that you're working into that. And sometimes I can do the easier things, and that's fine. What a way to live. It's a great metaphor.
Definitely.
Well, yeah. So do you do a cold plunge very often when it's not winter? I'm curious because I think probably more people have access to doing a cold shower or doing a cold plunge. So, do you do that very often at all?
Yeah, I mean, a cold shower, I always do like a minute at the end of my shower for sure. This has almost become like a normal thing. And then I mean, during the summer, it depends where I am. If I'm in London, I still go swimming, and it's not the same effect as in the winter, but it's still colder than the majority. So there is still kind of like a cool effect there. But
Yeah.
yes, if there's like, so for example, today, my friend said to me, "Oh, let's go to like a little spa. I have like a spa voucher. Let's go there." So we went, and they had a cold plunge, and she was like, "Oh my god, there's a cold plunge. Should we try it?" I was like, "100%, I need to try this," and it was great. I loved it. So like whenever I go to a place and there is an opportunity to go into something really cold, I'm there definitely.
Interesting. Okay. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're saying, all right, I hear that. The spa, the swimming, maybe. They're hearing the benefits. So how would somebody get started if they wanted to try this?
I think the easiest way to get started is start with cold showers. And you can work your way up, like do 10 seconds, then the next day do 20, then do 30. And I mean, nowadays, I think you can do a cold plunge anywhere. You could fill a bucket. I mean, I've seen people in London fill their bins with cold water and like sit in there or
Hopefully
something.
they're
Like it's
clean.
yeah, let's hope. So that's kind of wild. But there's also loads of like companies who now have these sort of little tubs that you could put into your garden. But if you don't have a garden, I would definitely say cold showers. And I think a lot of gyms nowadays also have cold plunges, which is interesting. And I think again, going back to that cold therapy, I've also tried, there's a thing called cryotherapy. I don't know if you heard about this, which I think a lot of the athletes do, which is nice. And you have probably a similar feeling than if you do cold water swimming, because I think there you're in there for, I don't know, maybe a minute, maybe 90 seconds, but it's even colder. It's something like, I don't know, minus 30 or something crazy. And it's interesting because when I did that cryotherapy, they also make sure that you have your ears, your hands, and your feet covered. Um, but again, I think if you look it up in combination with athletes, I think they use that to recover from injuries much faster.
Yes, ice baths. They absolutely do. Yes. Yeah. Really interesting. So I I have heard many times about at the end of your shower, turn to cold water. So I guess now I'm going to give myself this challenge to start actually doing that consistently. That's a great idea for an easy way to start. So, Karina, thank you. I think people are really going to find your story fascinating. And this is something you can do for your health that maybe becomes something that's so good for your mindset, which is clearly your story. And I love that. So, What's the best way for people to connect with you or just find you online and learn more?
So I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you probably link it in the show notes. So it's Corina Goetz on LinkedIn. I also do a lot of things on Instagram, and my Instagram is at starcat underscore Corina. And yeah, and then my website is star-cat.co.uk. But obviously a lot of the content that I do is very Middle East heavy. But every once in a while, I'll put in something about my swimming. And especially if I'm in London, I normally post a picture when I go or when I've been. And yeah, it's really quite cool.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And yes, I'll have all that in the show notes. Absolutely. So let me ask you then, as we wrap up, the question that I ask everybody, and that is, what is a song that comes to mind for you that has feelings of nostalgia attached to it or happy memories attached to it?
Oh my God. I don't know. I feel like I go through phases, and sometimes, and I'm sure everybody is the same, sometimes I discover songs from like years ago that I haven't
Mhm.
heard. And I feel like it's quite funny because I think with Instagram now, when you have different kind of trending audios, it's so funny. I found one the other day that is from like the 80s. It's a very German one. And my husband was like, oh my God, where did you find this? It's awful. I hated it back then and I still hate it. And I'm like, no, I'm really into it now. I think I'm going to do a reel with it. And he was like, oh my God. So yeah, so if anybody wants to know, the song is called Cherry Cherry Lady by a German group called Modern Talking. They were very famous in the 80s and early 90s in Europe. Like if you look at, like, I was looking at the video I think yesterday or something, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, like it's so 80s. Like
80s
the
videos are
big
something.
hair and
Yes.
everything. It was just so wild. And I was even a kid in the 80s, but I loved the song. And when I saw it on Instagram, I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I love it.
Awesome. I love it when something comes out from this question that I just don't know at all. And I will absolutely add that to our nostalgia playlist on Spotify and Amazon Music so everybody can check it out. Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. That's great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you being open to talking about your experience with cold water swimming because it really is something that I think is a big opportunity for people to do something for their health and their mindset. So thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.